As far back as I can remember, I was obsessed with individual differences. So what I mean by that, I remember just even like at my earliest memory, just looking and observing people in the jungle gym, and I know I should have been participating, but I always kind of felt like this observer and like, well, why is that person so effortlessly, climbing that, and that kid keeps clunkily falling down, and that kid is over there in the corner, like not making eye contact with anyone. And that kid over there is bullying everyone. I was always so just obsessed with like, what makes us individuals and unique personality and talents, what is talent and things like that. So I do recall those early memories. Also, I had a personal experience when I was young in the education system, where I was asked to repeat third grade. They told my parents they thought it a big idea if I repeated third grade, for a couple reasons. One, they said they thought I was too immature to go into fourth grade. By immature, they just didn't know what to make of me because I was very creative. Also had an auditory disability when I was very, very young because I had a lot of fluid in my ears. So I was essentially deaf the first couple years of my life.
Oh, wow.
And when I was able to have an operation to remove the fluid, it's not like I could hear immediately, so I was a little bit, it took me an extra couple milliseconds to process things in real time in the classroom.
Wow. There's actually a term for that, right?
Central auditory processing disorder.
So it's other people have it as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's totally a thing, yeah. It's still not as well understood as other disorders, but like autism and dyslexia or other learning disabilities, but it certainly is a real thing. Also, an anxiety issue. All these things in retrospect, I now understand myself pretty well now at this point after 40 years of existence. But, I can understand why it might have been confusing to educators that didn't really have the tools or understanding of various things, various neurological differences. So I definitely retreated inward and became really introspective and trying to figure out, not only what was happening to me, but who are these other kids that were in the special education room with me? What was that like? And then
So you were in special education as well?
They put me in special education. It was called the resource room, where I had to take remedial classes, and very confused because I found the classes so boring, and I didn't understand why I wasn't allowed to be challenged. So it was very frustrating to me. So yeah, even as young as can be, based on my personal experiences and everything, I became fascinated with the psychology, and I didn't know there was a whole field that existed. I didn't know science from schmience, you know what I mean? I was kept in special education till 9th grade, actually.
Wow!
And a teacher took me aside after class, and it was a substitute special ed teacher who had never seen me before, and she saw something in me that no one else had bothered to take the time to look beyond the labels that I had on me. And she took me aside after class, and she just looked at me, and she's like, I see you. And I was like, I looked down to make sure my zipper was not down, or I was like, what is she saying? And she's like, no, I see you're I think I see you. Why are you here? You're obviously capable of more. And I was like, no one's ever asked me that question before in my 9 grades here. And in my mind, it quickly went from why am I here to why am I here? And I felt really empowered for the first time to see what I was capable of. I just had no idea what I was capable of, and it became more of just a curiosity thing. And so I told my parents that night, I was like, I'm not reporting back to special ed. And they set up a big meeting with the school psychologist and everyone in the community. No one's ever broken out of special ed before in my school district. So they had nothing in the rule books for the student, saying, I'm out. Peace.
Right. I'm done.
I'm out.
I'm done.
Drop the mic, So they let me out on a trial basis is what they decided. And if I were to fail, they'd put me back in. And I was like, great vote of confidence there on their part. But I just tried everything to see what I was capable of. I wasn't college bound. And I realized, and I went from a CD remedial student basically overnight, literally the next semester, starting to get straight A's in honors classes. So
how? Just from a confidence switch?
I don't fully comprehend what exactly happened there, but I think I think that it was a matter of like, where do I direct my cognitive energies? So I had, I'm just going to keep it very real with you. I had retreated so inward to myself that I tuned out of the school system, but I became a really famous computer hacker.
Wait, like seriously?
Yeah, yeah. In middle school, like a world-renowned computer hacker called the Wizard.
Oh my
I know.
Oh
To
my
this day,
gosh.
people might be surprised to know that the Wizard was a 13-year-old kid in special ed.
Oh my gosh.
But that's where I directed all my cognitive energies. So it was great to then like go from underground, like to be able, oh wait, I can now finally have an opportunity to show whatever intelligence I have. And it was so exciting to me to get that opportunity. And I just almost overnight quit the hacking. And like put my all into school, and I loved learning, and I realized I loved learning. I realized I loved a lot of things I never had an opportunity to even know that I loved.
Wow. I mean, I don't know, but it sounds like it kind of was a confidence thing.
It must have been to a certain degree,
Yeah.
but also there was this kind of like a intense drive to prove to people that I could do something valuable. So I don't know if that's confidence, but it's something. It was a definite drive. I don't know how healthy that drive is.
That
But
seems to be a reoccurring theme
Yeah.
in a lot of talks that we have here, particularly with guests that come on to talk about success and motivation. Is a lot of them talk about like having some form of like chip on your shoulder a little bit, or this need to try and prove people wrong. So I think that's like an interesting pattern that I've seen so far.
Yeah, and I know this researcher at Penn who's doing this experimental work to show that if you in the laboratory manipulate that factor, so you give people like they say, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, it makes them more likely for them to want to then in a follow-up task to prove the experimenter that they can do it. So I think there might be some quirk of human nature there at play.
Yeah, yeah, and that would be a hard balance. I feel like of how much of that to give people to motivate them, but not too much to just shut them down.
Yeah.
So that's actually really interesting. We'll have to talk about that after, and maybe have that person on. But
Yeah.
so you start going, you get out of your special ed courses and you jump into, I guess, just like regular courses.
Yeah, I jumped into regular courses. I signed up for like Latin honors class. I loved Latin.
I'm sorry, what is it?
Latin.
Aladdin, as in the movie?
No,
Oh,
Latin.
Latin. I was like, yeah, I love that
I
movie
jumped
too.
into Aladdin to the genie bot thing. That's awesome.
You're blue. You're wearing
That's
blue,
true.
so
That's true.
that's funny. So Latin, wow, learning languages, getting
Now,
straight
I
A's.
want to be very clear. I sucked in a lot of things too. So this is not a story of like, like, I mean, it was cool to like figure out like what I was good and not good at, but like I jumped into musicals, and I was part of the community theater West Side Story, which I'm not ashamed to admit that I dropped out of because I couldn't handle I couldn't take the dancing anymore. If I had to do one more I was like, I'm out. And then they made me do it one more. And I said, well, I did say if you made me do it one more, I'm out. And so,
They're like, that's kind of how this whole thing works.
yeah, I just couldn't handle it. There are things that, just like geometry didn't click as much as algebra did for me. I find I have more of like a concrete analytical mind than visual spatial. But nevertheless, I went from not college bound to college bound. I applied to Carnegie Mellon my senior year to the psychology program, and I put in my personal statement, which I still have saved, about how our standard metrics of achievement and potential are missing out on a lot of kids. I even saw it even in my own special ed class. So many of my friends were capable of things that were far greater because I got a chance to know them and I was friends with them. And I'm like, well, how come no one else is seeing what I'm seeing in you? And it was really heartbreaking for me to see so many people of my friends around me in special ed. We all had low expectations. I mean, that's the thing. They all had low expectations for us. But I really saw, and Carnegie Mellon came back to me and they said, basically like, good story, bro. Nice essay.
But no.
But your SAT scores aren't high enough to redefine intelligence. Can you? So that was interesting, ironic thing. So I looked at the departments at Carnegie Mellon that didn't look at SAT scores too highly, and I found the opera department, and I just went right in like the following week after being rejected from the psychology program, and sang my heart out, and they accepted me on a partial scholarship to Carnegie Mellon for my voice, without realizing that I had already been rejected, and I was a whole year at Carnegie Mellon of a full-fledged card-carrying voice opera major.
When did you start like singing? Because I
So
imagine you didn't just go in there and audition.
that's
You
correct.
never.
That's correct. So around junior year or so in high school, or even sophomore, like once I got out of special ed, I think it was a joke or something. Like heard someone doing opera, and I just was like, we're in the car with my parents, and I was like, oh, whatever. And my mom's like, that's really good, and I was like, you mean I'm faking it really good? No, she's like, that's probably really good. And I went to the choir teacher there and asked her if I could join the choir. And she invited me, she's like, absolutely. And so I did do choir, and I started taking voice lessons. And I also played in the orchestra, cello. My grandfather
Oh my gosh.
was a cellist with the Philadelphia Orchestra and taught me how to play cello. So I definitely like was learning music and stuff. So it wasn't totally random that I went into the
Right.
opera.
But it got you in.
It got me
Carnegie.
in.
And I mean,
Through the back door.
from an outsider's perspective, hearing this story, it almost seems like no surprise that you kind of do what you do now, which is look at how we measure intelligence, right? Because of your story. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but was that your inspiration? Because to me, it kind of seems like, well, yeah, with a
Yes.
story like that, of course you would be interested
It was
in.
definitely my inspiration. I mean, I remember a moment when I was asking the school psychologist, the senior year in high school, if I was like, my senior year, can I be in gifted education before I leave high school? Because all my friends are in gifted ed, and I really want to do the cool things they do in that room. And the school psychologist looked at my IQ score, my testing evaluation from fourth grade, when I had these auditory issues and things, and used that score as a basis to deny me access. And it's just around that time, I just dawned on me like, wow, like I need to change the system. Like I really need to at some point, like your achievement should be able to trump your potential. And if you're actually doing it, it shouldn't. You shouldn't be. It shouldn't matter like what you were doing in like fourth grade. Like and that I had that insight in that moment, and I was like, I need to. And I didn't know the whole field of. I didn't know like there was a psychology of intelligence that existed. I only discovered that when I took a cognitive psychology course in sophomore year of college. But yeah.
And that's cognitive psychology. Is that right? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I've talked about this briefly on the show before, but I had kind of a similar upbringing too, somewhat, in that like as a child and a student, I was a very, very bright, involved, curious, well-behaved kid. I was a teacher's pet. I was always the one to raise my hand to participate. But my test, I would say probably about middle school to high school and beyond, elementary school is pretty good. But when it came to my grades and tests, especially the standardized testing, the big tests, I really struggled. I had a really hard time, and it was very very frustrating because I was actually trying.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be like seen as someone with a lot of potential. And, as you clearly know, that's not how they always gauge potential.
Yeah. And it's a shame that you feel like you'd have to get your value or, perception from a standardized test.
Yeah. So I think this is why your work has like really resonated with me.
I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would love to jump into your work. Well, actually, no, first, my goodness. There's more than just Carnegie Mellon. You went on to do even more.
Yeah, but that's the gist of my story.
Well, you know what? Our viewers actually really love hearing about our guest background. We actually, I think a couple of times
Really?
we skipped it and we got a bunch of comments and we're like, well, we didn't get their background. So
That's interesting. Well, I've told the story so much in the past 4 years.
Well, you can give the summarized.
Well, sure. So, the end of my freshman year, after enduring a year of the opera major, I went into the psychology department, and I mean, this was my plan all along. But I tried to make pretend that I was really cool about it. And I said, and the secretary was there on her lunch break, and I was just like, "Hey, do you think maybe I could be a minor in psychology?" It's called like foot in the door technique. You know, when you ask someone out on a date, you never tell them what you really want to do. You're like, "Hey, you guys get coffee."
That's
You
what
know?
all those guys.
Yeah. Hey, you want coffee? But anyway, it's like, hey, could I be a minor in psychology? You know, and she's like, yeah, sure. Like, no one's ever been this excited to be a minor in psychology at Carnegie Mellon before, and I was so excited. She's like, just sign this piece of paper, and I was like, you know, had this piece of paper in my hand, and I was walking home. Actually, was skipping home in my tights because I had dance class earlier that day. But I remember thinking, wow, I need to like tell people like the mystery of life is like find a way, you know, to get to where you want, like find a path where you can just show up, and then there'll be no one questions it. Like she didn't question whether I was smart enough to be there anymore because I was already there. You know, I was afraid. I mean, I was so nervous she was going to ask to look at my SAT scores, blah blah blah. But I was already at Carnegie Mellon, so she assumed I was smart enough to be a psychology major. And not only that, but because I, in a almost a very cheeky, a perverse sort of way, wanted to really prove how far I've come, I then declared a major in computer science from Carnegie Mellon, which is considered like, not many people, I don't tell this part of the story that often, but you know, like MIT and Carnegie Mellon, like, are considered like the top schools in
Oh, really?
the country for computer science.
And because you had already hacked the world, all the world's computers.
Yeah, so I was really interested in computer. That's right. I was really interested in computer science as a kid, and I was like, wait a minute, is it possible for me to study computer science at Carnegie Mellon while I'm here, pick that up as well? And so I graduated a double major in human computer interaction, cognitive science, psychology, and then a minor in opera. But yeah.
And then you went on to.
Then you're really interested in this story?
I think your story is fascinating.
Okay,
Someone who went from
amazing.
you were held back, special ed, to all that you've done.
You.
It's absolutely inspiring.
Well, so I mean, my senior year, by senior year, I was getting really good grades and everything, and I knew that I wanted to do a Ph.D. in human psychology and in cognitive psychology. I mean, and study human intelligence. And I applied to Harvard and Yale for grad school, and for Yale, there was this guy, Robert Sternberg, a psychologist that was studying redefining intelligence, and I was like, wow, I really want to work with him and redefine intelligence. So I had emailed him the summer before, and was like, can I be your water boy, basically? Like, can I come over to Yale and just like be your unpaid research assistant? And what do you think he said? Of course.
Sure.
Yeah. Excellent. I'm sure he was like, excellent, free labor. And I went there for a summer and just did everything, you know, like I could possibly do. And he fought for me on the committee. And I got accepted into the PhD program at Yale, which is the farthest thing from middle school Scott, you know, would ever imagine. I mean, college wasn't even really on my mind. So that was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you've clearly just kept studying ever since.
Yeah, ever since. I've relentlessly been studying human intelligence and creativity.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.